Eyes Wide Shut arrived in 1999 with one of the most fascinating casts Stanley Kubrick had ever assembled, led by Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, who were not only two major Hollywood stars, but also husband and wife in real life. Their casting immediately gave the film an additional psychological dimension. Kubrick was telling a story about marriage jealousy, temptation, sexual fantasy, insecurity, and the secrets that can exist between two people who believe they know each other completely. By placing a famous married couple at the center of that story, he made it almost impossible for audiences to separate the fictional relationship from the public image of the actors playing it. Tom Cruise stars as Dr. William Harford, usually called Bill, a successful New York physician whose comfortable understanding of his marriage begins to collapse after his wife admits that she once experienced an overwhelming sexual attraction to another man. By 1999, Cruise was already one of the most commercially powerful actors in the world. His breakthrough had come during the 1980s with films including Risky Business and Top Gun, which established his image as confident, energetic, ambitious, and intensely charismatic. Rain Man demonstrated that he could work effectively alongside a celebrated dramatic performer like Dustin Hoffman, while Born on the 4th of July gave Cruise one of his most demanding early dramatic roles and earned him an Academy Award nomination. During the 1990s, Cruise became even more dominant. A Few Good Men, The Firm, Interview with the Vampire, Mission, Impossible, and Jerry Maguire demonstrated his ability to move between courtroom drama, thriller, horror, action, and romantic drama while remaining a major box office attraction. Jerry Maguire brought him another Academy Award nomination and reinforced his reputation as a leading man capable of combining movie star charisma with emotional vulnerability. When Cruise entered Eyes Wide Shut, audiences therefore carried strong expectations about what a Tom Cruise character should be. Kubrick deliberately worked against those expectations. Bill Harford is wealthy, handsome, educated, and socially respected, but he is far less powerful than he initially imagines. Cruise spends much of the movie observing rather than controlling events. Bill walks through rooms, streets, parties, apartments, and corridors while repeatedly encountering situations he does not fully understand. He attempts to pursue sexual opportunities. Yet again and again something interrupts or defeats him. Cruise therefore had to suppress much of the commanding physical energy associated with his previous performances. That restraint is essential to the character. Bill initially possesses enormous confidence in his marriage and in his own understanding of women. Alice's confession destroys that confidence. Cruise gradually transforms him into a jealous, obsessive, frightened man whose professional status cannot protect him from emotional humiliation. Even his habit of announcing that he is a doctor begins to seem like an attempt to restore authority whenever circumstances move beyond his control. The performance became more appreciated with time, particularly because it revealed a passive and uncertain side of Cruise that audiences rarely saw in his blockbuster roles. The same year also produced another important dramatic performance from Cruise in Magnolia, where he played the aggressive motivational speaker Frank T.J. Mackey. Together, Magnolia and Eyes Wide Shut demonstrated an unusually adventurous period in his career. Yet Eyes Wide Shut did not redirect Cruise permanently towards psychological art films. During the following years, he returned increasingly to large-scale mainstream productions, including Mission, Impossible sequels, Minority Report, The Last Samurai, War of the Worlds, and eventually the action-centered phase that became one of the defining features of his later career. This makes Bill Harford increasingly unusual within Cruise's filmography. Nicole Kidman plays Alice Harford, and although she spent considerably less time on screen than Cruise, her performance provides an emotional event that launches the entire story. Kidman had begun her career in Australia and gained international attention through Dead Calm, the 1989 psychological thriller that demonstrated her ability to project both vulnerability and determination. She subsequently appeared opposite Cruise in Days of Thunder, where their real-life relationship began, and they worked together again in Far and Away. By the middle of the 1990s, Kidman was increasingly establishing an identity independent of her famous husband. Batman Forever gave her exposure in a major Hollywood blockbuster, but Gus Van Sant's The Dive was particularly important. Playing the dangerously ambitious Suzanne Stone allowed Kidman to display dark comedy, manipulation, sexuality, and psychological complexity. The performance helped challenge the idea that she was simply a glamorous movie star or Tom Cruise's wife. Eyes Wide Shut pushed that development further. Alice is introduced as elegant and privileged, apparently living an ideal life with a successful husband and young daughter. Kubrick gradually exposes a dissatisfaction beneath that polished surface. One of Kidman's defining scenes occurs during the bedroom argument, in which Alice challenges Bill's assumptions about female sexuality. Her laughter, anger, intoxication, frustration, and eventual confession about the naval officer transform what begins as a domestic conversation into the psychological explosion that drives the rest of the film. Kidman brings a combination of sensuality and emotional unpredictability to Alice. She can appear affectionate in one moment and devastatingly confrontational in the next. Her performance also prevents Alice from becoming simply the wife waiting at home while her husband experiences an adventure. Although Bill physically travels through the city, Alice's fantasies have enormous power over him. An imagined act becomes psychologically more destructive than an actual affair. Kidman therefore dominates portions of the movie even when she is absent from the screen. In retrospect, Eyes Wide Shut stands near the beginning of one of the strongest periods of Kidman's career. When Eyes Wide Shut was released in 1999, it entered popular culture surrounded by an unusual combination of anticipation, mystery, controversy, and tragedy. It was Stanley Kubrick's first feature film since Full Metal Jacket in 1987, meaning audiences had waited more than a decade for another work from one of cinema's most respected directors. Kubrick died in March 1999, only months before the film reached theaters, turning Eyes Wide Shut into his final statement. At the same time, its stars, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, were one of the most famous married couples in Hollywood. The combination created a cultural event that extended far beyond an ordinary movie release. The film arrived during an important transitional moment. The final years of the 20th century were filled with anxiety about technology, globalization, wealth, identity, sexuality, and the approaching millennium. Several major films released around this period questioned apparently comfortable realities. The Matrix imagined ordinary existence as an artificial construction. Fight Club attacked consumer identity and masculine dissatisfaction. American Beauty examined frustration beneath suburban prosperity. Eyes Wide Shut approached similar uncertainty from the intimate territory of marriage, desire, privilege, and secrecy. One of its most important cultural effects was the way it challenged the public image of Cruise and Kidman. Audiences knew them through celebrity magazines, interviews, premieres, and photographs presenting them as a glamorous Hollywood couple. Kubrick transformed that familiarity into part of the movie. Watching them portray a married couple discussing jealousy, sexual fantasies, fidelity, and emotional resentment encouraged viewers to wonder where performance ended and reality began. That fascination became even stronger after Cruise and Kidman separated in 2001. The film consequently became part of a larger conversation about celebrity relationships. Hollywood had always sold romantic images of its stars, but Eyes Wide Shut exposed how little outsiders can truly know about a marriage. Bill and Alice appear prosperous and stable. They have a beautiful home, a child, successful careers, and access to elite social circles. Yet a single conversation reveals enormous insecurity beneath that image. The contrast between public perfection and private uncertainty has remained culturally relevant in an era increasingly dominated by carefully managed celebrity identities. Its treatment of sexuality also generated extensive debate. The advertising emphasized Cruise, Kidman, nudity, and erotic mystery, leading some viewers to expect a conventional erotic thriller. Kubrick instead created something colder and more psychologically uncomfortable. Sexual encounters are repeatedly delayed, interrupted, commercialized, ritualized, imagined, or transformed into threats. Desire rarely produces satisfaction. It produces jealousy, fear, humiliation, curiosity, and uncertainty. This distinction contributed to the film's controversial initial reception. Some audiences found it distant or frustrating because it refused to behave like the erotic drama suggested by its promotional image. Over time, however, that refusal became one of its most discussed qualities. The film is now frequently interpreted less as a movie about sex than as a movie about the fantasies surrounding sex. Bill spends much of the story pursuing possibilities created by his wounded pride after Alice describes her attraction to another man. His journey is driven by imagination as much as physical desire. No element of Eyes Wide Shut has had a more recognizable cultural afterlife than the mask gathering at Somerton. The sequence combines elaborate masks, black cloaks, ritual movement, sexuality, architecture, and ominous music into one of the most distinctive images in modern cinema. Even people who have never watched the entire film may recognize the basic visual language of anonymous masked elites gathered inside an extravagant mansion. The mask became especially influential in fashion photography, music videos, advertisements, costume parties, nightclub imagery, and other films. Venetian-style masks already carried associations with carnival, anonymity, and forbidden behavior, but Eyes Wide Shut gave them a modern cinematic association with secrecy, wealth, ritual, and hidden identity. References to mysterious masked parties are now frequently compared to the film even when there is no direct connection. The Somerton sequence also helped generate one of the film's most persistent cultural interpretations. The idea that Eyes Wide Shut exposes secret behavior among extremely wealthy and powerful people. Kubrick never provides a complete explanation of the organization Bill encounters. The participants appear rich and influential, but their identities remain concealed. Ziegler later suggests that Bill has entered a world whose members possess enough power to control what happens around them. Because the film deliberately leaves important questions unanswered, audiences have spent decades filling those gaps with theories. This ambiguity became especially significant during the internet age. Online forums, video essays, social media discussions, podcasts, and fan communities repeatedly analyzed the masks, gestures, paintings, architecture, dialogue, costumes, and background details for hidden meanings. Some interpretations are thoughtful examinations of class and power, while others move into unsupported conspiracy theories. The distinction is important because the film itself does not verify the enormous real-world claims sometimes attached to it. Its ambiguity invites speculation, but speculation should not be mistaken for evidence. Nevertheless, the continuing theories demonstrate how effectively Kubrick created an atmosphere of inaccessible power. Bill is financially comfortable and professionally respected, yet Somerton reveals that he is still an outsider. His medical credentials, money, and social confidence mean almost nothing there. This gives the movie a strong class dimension. Bill believes he belongs to the upper levels of society until he discovers another level above him, protected by wealth, anonymity, and connections he cannot penetrate. The production of Eyes Wide Shut has become almost as legendary as the film itself. Stanley Kubrick was famous for demanding extensive preparation, numerous takes, and complete control over his productions, but his final movie pushed those methods to extraordinary levels. Principal photography began in late 1996, and the production continued for an exceptionally long period. Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman committed themselves to Kubrick's process for far longer than actors would normally expect on a major studio film. The result was a production surrounded by stories of secrecy, repetition, psychological intensity, and obsessive attention to detail. Kubrick had been interested for decades in adapting Dream Story, the 1926 novella by Austrian writer Arthur Schnitzler. The original story takes place in Vienna and follows a doctor whose marriage is destabilized after a conversation about sexual temptation. Kubrick recognized the cinematic possibilities of the material long before he finally made the film. He eventually worked with writer Frederick Raphael on transforming Schnitzler's story into a contemporary drama centered on Bill and Alice Harford. One of the largest changes involved moving the setting from early 20th century Vienna to modern New York. Yet Kubrick himself had become famous for avoiding international travel and preferred working in England. As a result, one of the movie's most remarkable production achievements was creating New York without shooting most of the film there. Streets were reconstructed at Pinewood Studios and other locations in England, with production designers carefully reproducing Manhattan details. Kubrick's team studied real New York streets through photographs, measurements, and other visual references. Storefronts, signs, newspaper stands, pavement details, traffic markings, Christmas decorations, and building entrances were assembled to create an artificial city convincing enough to support Bill's long nighttime journey. Some exterior material was obtained in New York, but Cruise performed much of Bill's wandering through Manhattan on sets built thousands of miles away. The artificial quality of these streets ultimately became an advantage. The New York of Eyes Wide Shut feels recognizable but subtly unreal. Streets appear strangely quiet, Distances seem uncertain, and Bill repeatedly encounters significant people with dreamlike convenience. Whether every unusual quality was consciously designed to announce a dream state is debatable, but Kubrick's controlled environment allowed him to shape the city according to the emotional needs of the story rather than documentary realism. The Harford apartment was similarly constructed with extraordinary attention to detail. The design was reportedly influenced by Kubrick's own New York apartment from earlier in his life. Books, paintings, furniture, lamps, toys, bathroom objects, and domestic clutter create a home that feels inhabited rather than simply decorated. This realism is important because the apartment functions as the emotional center of the movie. Bill's increasingly surreal journey begins and ends within an environment that appears safe and familiar. Christmas decorations became another major production choice. Although Schnitzler's original story was not defined by Christmas in the same way, Kubrick filled his adaptation with trees and colored lights. They appear in apartments, shops, restaurants, parties, hotel spaces, and streets. The decorations help unify locations visually while producing an ironic contrast between festive warmth and emotional unease. The constant glow of Christmas lights eventually became one of the film's most recognizable characteristics. The production is especially famous for Kubrick's use of repeated takes. Actors who work with him often described a process in which scenes could be performed again and again until familiar acting habits began to disappear, rather than simply demanding one specific predetermined performance. Kubrick sometimes seemed interested in exhausting the obvious possibilities until something less calculated emerged. Cruise, whose performances were usually associated with precision and energetic control, was placed inside a working method that deliberately challenged that control. One frequently discussed example involves Sidney Pollack, who played Victor Ziegler. Pollack was himself an accomplished director and therefore understood filmmaking from both sides of the camera. Yet Kubrick's methods could still be exhausting. The billiard room confrontation between Ziegler and Bill required extensive shooting despite appearing relatively simple on screen. Kubrick concentrated on pauses, movements, gestures, line readings, and subtle shifts in power. The resulting scene feels conversational, but underneath it is a carefully controlled psychological duel. Pollack was not originally the only actor connected to Ziegler. Harvey Keitel initially occupied the role, but left production and was replaced. Jennifer Jason Leigh was also originally involved as Marian Nathanson before scheduling circumstances led to Marie Richardson taking the part. Such changes demonstrate one consequence of the unusually extended production. Actors had commitments outside a film whose schedule could be difficult to predict. The mass ceremony required another level of coordination. The sequence depended on architecture, choreography, costumes, masks, nudity, music, camera movement, and precise blocking working together, rather than presenting the gathering as a chaotic party. Kubrick designed it with ceremonial order. Participants stand in controlled arrangements, move slowly, and rarely behave like ordinary party guests. This transforms the event from a simple sexual gathering into something theatrical and threatening. Several English locations helped create Somerton. Mentmore Towers in Buckinghamshire provided the exterior of the mansion, while other interiors and constructed spaces contributed to the complete environment seen in the film. The use of grand architecture was crucial. Bill is not simply entering a private house. He appears to cross into a different social universe. Huge rooms, formal staircases, polished floors, elaborate decoration, and masked figures emphasize his vulnerability. The masks themselves were selected to create individuality, while preserving anonymity. Venetian-inspired designs allowed each participant to appear visually distinct without revealing identity. Eyes Wide Shut follows Dr. William Harford through what initially appears to be a secure and privileged life, then gradually transforms its ability into a psychological journey through jealousy, desire, fear, and uncertainty. Stanley Kubrick structures the film less like a conventional thriller than a dream whose events become increasingly strange while remaining connected to recognizable reality. The story moves deliberately, allowing conversations, silences, repeated locations, and seemingly minor encounters to accumulate meaning. Rather than building toward one simple revelation, the narrative repeatedly raises questions that remain only partially answered. The film begins with Bill and Alice Harford preparing for an elegant Christmas party hosted by Victor Ziegler, one of Bill's wealthy patients. Their marriage initially appears comfortable. They have money, social status, a young daughter, and an attractive Manhattan apartment. Yet Kubrick quickly introduces small signs of distance between them. At the party, Bill and Alice separate and experience different temptations. Alice dances with an older Hungarian man named Sandor Savist, who openly attempts to seduce her. Meanwhile, Bill is approached by two young women who flirt aggressively with him. Bill's flirtation is interrupted when Ziegler asks for his professional assistance. Upstairs, Bill discovers a naked young woman named Mandy unconscious after taking drugs while with Ziegler. Bill revives her and warns her that she has been extremely fortunate. The incident introduces several elements that become important later: wealth, sexual secrecy, physical danger, and Bill's ability to enter private spaces because he is a doctor. He witnesses something compromising, but Ziegler expects his discretion. The central narrative disruption occurs the following evening. Bill and Alice smoke marijuana and begin discussing the previous night's party. Their conversation develops into an argument about attraction and fidelity. Bill confidently suggests that women are naturally less interested in casual sexual encounters than men, and assumes that Alice's love for him protects their marriage from serious temptation. Alice reacts with disbelief and laughter before destroying his certainty with a confession. She tells Bill that during a previous family vacation she saw a naval officer and experienced such intense desire that, if the man had asked, she believes she might have abandoned Bill and their daughter for a single night with him. Nothing actually happened. The officer may not even have known what Alice felt. Yet the confession is devastating precisely because Bill had never imagined Alice capable of such desire. From this moment forward, the film becomes largely organized around Bill's inability to stop imagining his wife with another man. A telephone call interrupts the argument. One of Bill's patients has died, giving him an excuse to leave the apartment. This begins the nighttime journey that occupies much of the film. At the dead patient's home, the man's daughter Marion suddenly tells Bill that she loves him, despite being engaged to someone else. Bill rejects the opportunity and leaves. The encounter mirrors Alice's confession. Another apparently respectable relationship contains a hidden desire capable of disrupting ordinary life. While walking through Manhattan, Bill encounters Domino, a young sex worker who invites him to her apartment. He follows her and prepares to have sex, but Alice telephones just before anything happens. Bill pays Domino and leaves. Again, the possibility of infidelity appears without becoming an actual affair. This pattern is essential to the structure. Bill repeatedly approaches sexual transgression, but never fully completes it. His journey is therefore driven more by fantasy, resentment, and curiosity than by physical satisfaction. Bill next enters a jazz club and unexpectedly meets Nick Nightingale, an old medical school acquaintance who now works as a pianist. Nick mentions another engagement later that night and reluctantly reveals unusual details. He has been hired to perform at a secret gathering where he must play blindfolded. He has attended similar events before and has witnessed extraordinary scenes when the blindfold was not completely secure. Bill becomes fascinated. Nick eventually reveals a location and password. Bill now has a destination, but he needs the correct clothing. He visits a costume shop after hours and persuades the owner, Milich, to rent him a tuxedo, cloak, hood, and mask. During the visit, Bill witnesses Milich's young daughter with two older men in a disturbing situation. The episode adds another layer of moral uncertainty to the night, while also providing Bill with a disguise that allows him to continue. A taxi takes Bill to the remote mansion at Somerton. The narrative now shifts fully into ritualistic mystery. Bill gives the password and enters a world of masked participants dressed in formal black cloaks. Inside a vast hall, women are presented during a ceremonial gathering. Afterward, masked guests move into different rooms where sexual activity occurs openly. Bill wanders through the mansion, simultaneously fascinated and frightened. One masked woman warns Bill that he is in serious danger and urges him to leave. He ignores the warning until he is confronted and brought back before the assembled group. The organizers demand that he identify himself by removing his mask. Bill's disguise has failed. As the situation becomes increasingly threatening, the mysterious woman intervenes and declares that she will redeem him. Bill is released but warned not to investigate further. This is the narrative's apparent climax. Yet Kubrick refuses to end the story there. Instead, The following day becomes an investigation into what happened. Bill attempts to retrace his steps and discover whether the danger was real. Nick has disappeared from his hotel under suspicious circumstances. When Bill returns his costume, he discovers that the mask is missing. Millich, meanwhile, behaves differently toward the two men previously found with his daughter, suggesting that another disturbing transaction may have occurred. Bill travels back toward Somerton, but is stopped at the gate and given an envelope containing another warning. The mystery is therefore not confined to the previous night's ritual. Someone knows who Bill is and knows that he has returned. His confidence continues to collapse because he cannot determine the limits of the organization's knowledge or power. Eyes Wide Shut is built around a contradiction suggested by its title. The possibility of looking directly at something while refusing or failing to understand what is being seen. Stanley Kubrick uses Bill and Alice Harford's marriage to explore desire, jealousy, fidelity, class, secrecy, identity, mortality, and the difference between fantasy and action. The film presents these ideas indirectly, allowing repeated objects, colors, locations, and encounters to create connections without reducing the story to a single explanation. Its symbolism works because many images can carry several meanings at once. The central theme is the instability of sexual certainty. Bill begins the film believing that he understands both his marriage and female desire. He assumes Alice is faithful not merely because she chooses to be faithful, but because he imagines that her sexuality operates differently from his own. Alice's confession about the naval officer destroys this assumption. She reveals that she was capable of experiencing a desire powerful enough to make her imagine abandoning her entire life for a stranger. Nothing actually happened between Alice and the officer, yet the fantasy becomes more powerful to Bill than many physical events. Kubrick repeatedly shows Bill imagining Alice having sex with the officer in stylized monochrome images. These visions demonstrate how jealousy creates its own internal cinema. Bill becomes both director and audience of a scene that never occurred. His suffering comes from an image created inside his own mind. This establishes one of the film's most important ideas. Fantasies can have real consequences. Alice's attraction remained imaginary, while Bill's response leads him physically across New York and eventually into Somerton. The movie refuses to create a simple moral hierarchy in which actions matter and thoughts do not. Alice's fantasy wounds Bill. Bill's attempted infidelities wound his understanding of himself. Dreams, thoughts, intentions, and actions constantly overlap. Masks provide the film's clearest symbol. At Somerton, masks allow powerful people to participate in forbidden behavior while protecting their identities. The mask represents anonymity, but also represents social performance. Bill wears one literally at the ceremony, yet throughout his ordinary life he wears less visible masks. Respectable doctor, confident husband, wealthy professional, desirable man. Alice similarly performs the role of elegant wife and mother, while possessing an interior life Bill has never seriously considered. The title therefore applies to the characters' relationship. Bill and Alice have been looking at one another for years, but parts of their identities remain hidden. Their eyes are open, yet metaphorically shut. The film suggests that intimacy does not mean complete knowledge. Marriage can create familiarity while simultaneously encouraging assumptions that prevent genuine observation. Bill's missing mask becomes especially important. After returning from Somerton, he discovers that it is no longer with the costume. Later, he finds it lying beside Alice on their bed. The image brings external mystery directly into the marital space. The bed should represent intimacy and safety, while the mask represents secrecy and deception. By placing them together, Kubrick visually connects Bill's secret journey to the truth he has concealed from his wife. Whether someone returned the mask or Alice discovered it through ordinary circumstances is less important than its psychological function. Bill can no longer keep his identities separated. The doctor, husband, jealous fantasist, sexual adventurer, and mass intruder collapse into one person. His emotional breakdown occurs when the symbol of concealment appears beside the person from whom he has been concealing the truth. Eyes Wide Shut also examines class and social power. Bill is clearly privileged. He is a successful physician who lives comfortably, attends expensive parties, carries substantial cash, and expects his professional status to command respect. Throughout his journey, he frequently identifies himself as a doctor. The title becomes almost a social password, granting him access to private homes and allowing him to ask questions other people might not answer. Somerton reveals the limits of that privilege. Bill enters believing that the correct clothes, money, and password can make him belong. They cannot. The people behind the masks appear to occupy a social level beyond his own. They know the rules, while Bill merely imitates them. Once discovered, his professional identity provides no protection. His wealth is enough to approach this world, but not enough to control it. Passwords and doors therefore become symbols of hierarchy. Bill spends the film entering spaces: Ziegler's bathroom, Marion's home, Domino's apartment, the costume shop, the jazz club, Somerton the hotel, and the hospital morgue. Each location offers a different degree of access. The secret ceremony makes social exclusion literal. Knowing the password opens the first door, but true membership requires knowledge Bill does not possess. Money is another recurring symbol of Bill's power and its limitations. He uses cash constantly, paying taxi drivers, Domino, Millich, and others. Money allows him to extend ordinary rules and persuade people to cooperate. Yet it cannot purchase emotional security, erase Alice's fantasy, guarantee entry into Somerton, or reveal the truth about Mandy. Kubrick presents money as extremely useful but ultimately inadequate against deeper forms of power. Christmas lights create one of the film's most persistent visual motifs. Nearly every environment glows with color decorations. Christmas traditionally suggests family, innocence, generosity, and domestic warmth. Kubrick places jealousy, prostitution, drug use, deception, and secret sexuality inside that festive atmosphere. The contrast makes familiar spaces feel strange. The lights are beautiful, but their beauty cannot eliminate what happens beneath them. The Christmas setting also connects to consumption. Bill's journey moves through a city filled with shops, expensive homes, costumes, services, and transactions. Sexuality itself repeatedly intersects with commerce. Domino negotiates a price. Bill rents the costume required to enter Somerton. Millich's relationship with the men discovered alongside his daughter changes in a way that implies troubling commercial accommodation. Desire exists within a world where almost everything appears negotiable. Eyes Wide Shut has one of the most immediately recognizable visual styles in Stanley Kubrick's career. Working with cinematographer Larry Smith, Kubrick created a world that appears realistic enough to be recognizable as contemporary New York, yet artificial enough to feel like a dream remembered after waking. The cinematography constantly balances these two qualities. Apartments, streets, hotel rooms, stores, mansions, and nightclubs contain familiar details, but lighting, color, camera movement, and composition transform them into psychological spaces shaped by Bill Harford's growing jealousy and uncertainty. Color is central to the film's visual identity. Warm reds, golds, yellows, and oranges dominate many interiors, while colder blues appear through windows and throughout nighttime environments. Kubrick does not turn these colors into a simple code, but he repeatedly places warm and cold tones against each other. The result is a visual tension between intimacy and distance, safety and danger, domestic familiarity and sexual fantasy. The Harford's apartment demonstrates this approach immediately. Warm lamps and Christmas lights create an inviting domestic environment, but blue light frequently enters through windows and surrounding spaces. Bill and Alice therefore inhabit a home that looks comfortable while already containing visual divisions. Kubrick uses a contrast to prevent domestic life from appearing completely secure even before their argument exposes the emotional uncertainty beneath it. Christmas lights are perhaps the movie's most persistent visual motif. Trees and strings of colored bulbs appear almost everywhere Bill travels. Instead of using Christmas decorations merely to establish the season, Kubrick makes them part of the film's lighting system. The small points of colored illumination create glowing backgrounds that are beautiful, romantic, and strangely unreal. Their repetition also makes separate locations feel as though they belong to the same continuous dream. This is especially effective because Christmas imagery normally suggests childhood, family, celebration, and innocence. In Eyes Wide Shut, those associations coexist with adultery, prostitution, drugs, death, and secret sexual behavior. The visual design never allows the viewer to forget the contradiction. Bill can enter increasingly dangerous environments while Christmas trees continue glowing peacefully in the background. Red becomes especially prominent in spaces associated with wealth, sexuality, and power. Ziegler's mansion is filled with luxurious warm tones. The billiard room used for Bill and Ziegler's final confrontation is dominated by deep red surfaces. Somerton also uses red as part of its ceremonial visual language. The color gives these spaces physical richness, while suggesting danger beneath their elegance. Blue often creates the opposite sensation. Night scenes and windows frequently contain intense blue light that separates characters from the warmth around them. Alice is sometimes surrounded by blue tones during intimate or psychologically uncertain moments, producing an almost unreal atmosphere. Kubrick uses this exaggerated nighttime color, not as strict naturalism, but as emotional lighting. The city outside the apartment seems less like ordinary Manhattan than a mental landscape waiting for Bill. The film's deliberate grain is another important characteristic. Kubrick and Smith pushed film stock in ways that allowed them to work with relatively low levels of available and practical illumination. This process contributed visible grain and unusual texture to portions of the image, rather than attempting the polished clarity associated with many expensive Hollywood productions. Eyes Wide Shut sometimes embraces softness and roughness. That texture is particularly effective during Bill's nighttime journey. Streetlights, shop windows, Christmas bulbs, lamps, and signs seem to glow through the grain. Faces can appear slightly separated from their surroundings, while backgrounds become fields of colored light. The visual effect reinforces the sensation that Bill is moving through a city that is physically present but psychologically distorted. Kubrick's framing remains characteristically controlled. He frequently places people in symmetrical compositions or emphasizes strong architectural lines. Corridors, doorways, staircases, and large rooms become visual structures that guide the viewer's attention. At Somerton, symmetry is especially important because it gives the ceremony a sense of ritual order. The masked figures are not simply gathered randomly. Their arrangement suggests rules, hierarchy, and authority. The camera often follows Bill as he walks, creating a recurring sensation of movement through interconnected spaces. Bill travels through streets, hallways, apartments, stores, and rooms while the camera accompanies or observes him. These tracking movements turn the film into a visual journey. The audience is repeatedly positioned near Bill, seeing new environments as he encounters them while sharing his limited understanding of what lies ahead. At the same time, Kubrick sometimes allows the camera to remain detached. Rather than relying constantly on rapid cutting or close-ups, he gives characters room to exist within their environments. This creates a tension between intimacy and observation. We may be close enough to study Bill's expression, yet the formal composition can make him appear like a figure being watched inside a larger system. Mirrors provide another major visual device. Alice is frequently associated with reflections, most famously during intimate scenes where her attention shifts toward her own image. Mirrors create visual doubling, allowing a character and a reflected version of that character to occupy the frame simultaneously. In a movie about hidden identities and private fantasies, this doubling becomes naturally suggestive. The famous opening image of Alice removing her dress is an excellent example of Kubrick's visual economy. The shot is brief, composed with almost startling directness, and immediately establishes the film's interest in looking, bodies, marriage, and private space. Yet Kubrick does not maintain this direct erotic presentation. As the film continues, sexuality becomes increasingly obscured by mirrors, costumes, masks, distance, darkness, ritual, and Bill's imagination. The soundtrack of Eyes Wide Shut is one of the most important elements in creating the film's hypnotic and unsettling atmosphere. Stanley Kubrick had always treated music as a fundamental part of cinematic storytelling, and his final film continues that tradition. Rather than using a conventional Hollywood score that constantly tells the audience what to feel, Eyes Wide Shut combines original music by Jocelyn Pook with classical compositions, jazz, popular songs, and carefully controlled silence. The result is a soundtrack that moves between romance, temptation, mystery, ritual, fear, and emotional isolation. One of the defining characteristics of the film is how dramatically its music changes, according to Bill Harford's psychological state. The early scenes contain elegant party music and familiar social sounds. As Bill's jealousy grows and his nighttime journey becomes increasingly dangerous, the soundtrack becomes more repetitive and threatening. Music therefore functions almost like another narrator. It tells us that Bill has moved away from ordinary domestic reality, even when the locations around him still appear recognizable. The most famous musical element is the simple piano motif associated with Bill's increasingly paranoid journey. The piece's music recitated to by Hungarian composer György Ligeti. Kubrick had previously used Ligeti's music to extraordinary effect in 2001, A Space Odyssey, and his return to composer creates a subtle connection with his earlier work. Here, however, the scale is completely different. Instead of accompanying cosmic mystery, the music follows one frightened man through streets and rooms. The composition is remarkably sparse. Individual piano notes are struck with large spaces between them, creating tension through absence rather than complexity. Each note seems to arrive like a warning. Because the pattern is so minimal, the audience begins anticipating the next sound. Silence becomes part of the composition, and waiting becomes uncomfortable. This music is especially effective during Bill's investigation after Somerton. He no longer knows whether he is being watched, followed, threatened, or manipulated. The piano does not provide answers. Instead, it turns his uncertainty into sound. A complicated orchestral score might have made the situation feel like a conventional thriller. Ligeti's isolated notes make it feel stranger and more psychological. Jocelyn Pook's contribution is equally central. Her music for the Somerton ceremony provides some of the film's most disturbing sounds. The ritual sequence required music capable of suggesting something ancient, sacred, erotic, and threatening without clearly belonging to one familiar tradition. Pook created an atmosphere that seems to exist outside Bill's ordinary world. During the ceremony, the soundtrack features a deep male vocal line with an uncanny reverse quality. The effect immediately tells the audience that Bill has entered a place governed by unfamiliar rules. The voice does not function like ordinary dialogue because its meaning is inaccessible. Instead, it becomes pure atmosphere. Combined with the slow movements of mass participants, it makes the ceremony feel organized and deliberate rather than merely decadent. The use of reverse liturgical material also generated controversy. An orthodox chant was incorporated in reverse form, and concerns were later raised about the sacred material being used in connection with the film's sexual ritual. Changes were subsequently made in certain releases. The controversy illustrates how powerful the soundtrack was. Viewers did not experience the ceremony merely as background music, but as something carrying religious and cultural associations. Pook's music throughout the film frequently works through repetition. Instead of giving Bill a traditional heroic theme, the score traps him in side patterns. This mirrors the narrative itself. Bill repeatedly encounters temptation, interruption, uncertainty, and humiliation. His journey seems to progress geographically while emotionally circling the same obsession: Alice's confession and his inability to control what has awakened inside him. The film's use of jazz creates a different atmosphere. Nick Nightingale is a pianist, and Bill reconnects with him at the Sonata Cafe. Jazz belongs to the recognizable nightlife of the city and initially feels relaxed compared with the ritualistic music that follows. Yet Nick becomes a bridge between ordinary nightlife and Somerton. Through him, music literally provides Bill access to the secret gathering. This makes Nick's profession narratively important. He is hired to play while blindfolded, meaning that music exists inside the ceremony, while the musician is supposedly prevented from seeing it. The idea perfectly matches the film's obsession with seeing and not seeing. Nick can hear and participate, but is not permitted to look. Bill, by contrast, enters because he wants to see what is hidden. Kubrick also makes important use of pre-existing songs. At Ziegler's Christmas Party, the music establishes sophistication and wealth while allowing conversations and flirtations to unfold naturally. The atmosphere is elegant rather than threatening, yet the party contains the first indications of the film's darker world. Alice is being seduced downstairs while Bill secretly treats Mandy upstairs. Pleasant music therefore exists beside behavior the respectable surface of the party conceals. Chris Isaac's Baby Did a Bad Thing became strongly associated with the film through its promotional campaign and central imagery. Its use helped shape public expectations that Eyes Wide Shut would be an intensely erotic experience, centered on the real-life chemistry of Cruise and Kidman. The song's seductive rhythm and provocative title complemented the marketing, even though the finished film itself is far more psychologically cold and ambiguous than the advertisement suggested. Another crucial musical selection is Shostakovich's Waltz No. 2, which accompanies the opening and closing credits, and became deeply associated with Eyes Wide Shut. Eyes Wide Shut arrived in theaters in 1999, carrying expectations that almost no film could realistically satisfy. It was Stanley Kubrick's first feature in 12 years, his first since Full Metal Jacket, and it became his final film after his death in March 1999. It also starred Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, then one of Hollywood's most famous married couples, playing husband and wife in a story centered on jealousy, sexual fantasy, temptation, and secrecy. Before most audiences had seen a frame, the movie had already become an event. Warner Brothers promoted the film as an erotic mystery, and much of the publicity concentrated on Cruise and Kidman's intimate scenes. This created expectations of an unusually explicit mainstream Hollywood production. Reports about the exceptionally long shoot and Kubrick's secrecy added to the fascination. Some viewers therefore entered theaters expecting a provocative erotic thriller, while Kubrick had actually made a slow psychological drama in which sexual opportunities are repeatedly interrupted, complicated, commercialized, or transformed into sources of anxiety. That difference between expectation and reality shaped much of the initial response. Some critics admired the film immediately, praising its atmosphere, visual precision, performances, ambiguity, and refusal to provide simple explanations. Others consider it frustratingly slow, emotionally distant, overly controlled, or less profound than the mystery surrounding its production had suggested. The result was not universal rejection or universal celebration, but a divided conversation unusually appropriate for a film built around uncertainty. Roger Ebert was among the prominent critics who responded positively. He recognized the film as an exploration of desire and jealousy rather than treating its sexual imagery as an end in itself. Other supporters emphasized Kubrick's ability to make familiar environments feel dreamlike and threatening. The deliberate pacing, repeated Christmas lights, masks, long conversations, and mysterious summit sequence were viewed as evidence that Kubrick was constructing a psychological experience rather than a conventional suspense story. Negative reactions frequently focused on pacing. Eyes Wide Shut runs for more than 2.5 hours and often allows scenes to develop through extended pauses, repeated dialogue, walking, waiting, and apparently ordinary interactions. Viewers expecting the narrative efficiency of a thriller could find Bill Harford's journey unusually slow. Kubrick frequently delays information rather than delivering it, and even the film's major explanation from Victor Ziegler creates additional uncertainty instead of resolving everything. Tom Cruise's performance was also debated. Cruise was one of the biggest movie stars in the world, associated with energetic, confident protagonists. Bill is intentionally different. He spends much of the film confused, jealous, passive, and increasingly frightened. Some early viewers interpreted Cruise's restraint as emotional limitation. Later assessments have often treated that same quality as central to performance. Bill believes himself to be confident and socially powerful, but the narrative continually demonstrates how little control he actually possesses. Nicole Kidman's performance received substantial attention, particularly the bedroom argument in which Alice describes her attraction to a naval officer. Her laughter, anger, intoxication, and direct challenge to Bill's assumptions became one of the film's most frequently discussed scenes. Even critics uncertain about the film as a whole often recognize Kidman's ability to transform Alice from an apparently conventional wife into the psychological force that drives Bill's entire journey. The real marriage between Cruise and Kidman complicated audience reactions. Many viewers inevitably wondered whether the fictional arguments reflected anything about the actors' private relationship. Both performers resisted simplistic interpretations of that kind, but the curiosity never disappeared. When their marriage ended roughly 2 years after the film's release, Eyes Wide Shut gained an additional layer of retrospective fascination that neither Kubrick nor the actors could have anticipated when production began. The greatest controversy surrounding the American theatrical release concerned censorship. The Motion Picture Association ratings process created a commercial problem because Warner Brothers wanted an R rating rather than the more restrictive NC-17. To reduce the explicit visibility of sexual activity during the summit sequence, digital figures were inserted into portions of the American version, strategically blocking parts of the image. The alteration immediately generated criticism. Kubrick had one of the strongest reputations for artistic control in modern filmmaking, and he had died before the film reached theaters. The idea that computer-generated bodies were being placed into compositions in his final movie seemed especially troubling to admirers of his work. Supporters of the release argued that the alteration allowed the film to reach a larger American audience and had been anticipated as a possible distribution requirement. Nevertheless, the controversy became inseparable from discussion of the film. International audiences in many territories were able to see the unobscured imagery, and later releases made the uncensored version widely available. As a result, the digitally altered American theatrical version eventually became more of a historical curiosity than the standard way audiences encountered the film. Yet the debate remained significant because it occurred at a moment when digital technology was making it increasingly easy for studios to modify completed images. Another controversy involved the music used during the masked ritual. Jocelyn Pook incorporated reversed Orthodox liturgical material into the soundtrack, producing one of the movie's most disturbing audio effects. Objections were raised regarding the use of sacred material in connection with a sexual ceremony, and alterations followed in certain versions. Like the ratings dispute, the incident reinforced the sense that Eyes Wide Shut was provoking cultural and religious sensitivities beyond ordinary questions of film criticism. Commercially, the movie performed respectably, especially considering its length, adult subject matter, and unusual structure. The legacy of Eyes Wide Shut has grown considerably since its release in 1999. What initially arrived as Stanley Kubrick's controversial final film gradually became one of the most discussed works of his career. Its influence cannot be measured through sequels or a traditional franchise. Instead, it survives through visual references, psychological thrillers, filmmakers inspired by its atmosphere, fashion imagery, music videos, television, internet culture, and decades of debate about what its mysteries actually mean. Its greatest achievement may be that audiences continue to reinterpret it long after the circumstances surrounding its release disappeared. Kubrick's death shortly before the film reached theaters immediately gave Eyes Wide Shut a unique position in cinema history. Every major Kubrick film had attracted analysis, but this one inevitably became associated with finality. Viewers wonder whether its themes of marriage, mortality, fantasy, and hidden worlds represented some kind of concluding statement. It would be misleading to treat the film as a deliberate farewell, because Kubrick did not expect it to be his final completed work, but history made it one. Its reputation also benefited enormously from repeated viewing. During its theatrical release, many people encountered a slow psychological drama after advertising had encouraged expectations of an erotic thriller. Later audiences approached it with greater awareness of its unusual rhythm. On home video, viewers could examine recurring objects' colors, paintings, masks, Christmas lights, mirrors, and lines of dialogue. The film became particularly suited to a culture of close analysis. The Somerton sequence has produced the most obvious visual legacy. Black cloaks, Venetian-inspired masks, grand architecture, ritualistic movement, and anonymous wealthy participants created an instantly recognizable cinematic language. Later movies, television programs, advertisements, fashion shoots, music videos, and comedy sketches have used similar imagery, sometimes as direct homage, and sometimes simply because Kubrick's version became so culturally familiar. A mass gathering in a luxurious mansion now carries associations that extend beyond ordinary costume parties. It suggests secrecy, privilege, forbidden behavior, and hidden systems of power. Eyes Wide Shut did not invent masks, secret societies, or ritual imagery, but combined them so effectively that later examples are frequently compared with Kubrick's film whether the resemblance was intentional or not. The masks themselves became some of the movie's most recognizable objects. Replicas inspired by those seen at Somerton have circulated as collectibles, decorative objects, and costume pieces. Posters and home video artwork frequently emphasize the mask because it summarizes the film's central ideas so efficiently. It represents secrecy, identity, performance, sexual anonymity, and the danger of entering a world without understanding its rules. Unlike many successful films, Eyes Wide Shut did not produce an official sequel, spin-off, or conventional franchise. A sequel would arguably contradict much of what makes the ending effective. Bill and Alice's future remains uncertain, and the Somerton mystery is powerful because it is never completely solved. Explaining exactly who belongs to the organization or what happens next would remove the ambiguity that has allowed the film to survive as an object of interpretation. Its influence is therefore more atmospheric than narrative. Later filmmakers exploring desire, jealousy, wealthy social circles, secret gatherings, and dreamlike urban environments have worked in territory that invites comparison with Eyes Wide Shut. The film demonstrated that erotic material could be used to create anxiety rather than simple excitement, and that sexual temptation could function as psychological horror without turning the story into a conventional horror film. The movie's dream structure has also proved influential. Bill's journey is technically understandable as a sequence of events, but encounters appear with the strange convenience and repetition of dreams. People emerge when his psychological state requires them. Locations seem both realistic and artificial. Conversations echo one another. Sexual possibilities repeatedly appear and disappear. This approach influenced appreciation for narratives in which emotional logic matters as much as literal realism. Eyes Wide Shut also became an important reference point for filmmakers interested in subjective male insecurity. Bill initially appears to possess nearly everything associated with success: money, education, professional status, physical attractiveness, a beautiful family, and access to wealthy social circles. Yet one confession from Alice destabilizes him completely. His subsequent journey exposes a fragility beneath his confidence. This portrayal became increasingly interesting as film criticism devoted more attention to masculinity and the gap between social power and emotional security. Bill's behavior is not presented as heroic conquest. His attempts to restore his confidence repeatedly leave him more confused. The movie reverses the expected fantasy of a successful man enjoying unrestricted sexual freedom. Every apparent opportunity produces complications. Nicole Kidman's Alice also gained importance within the film's legacy. Although Bill occupies most of the running time, Alice controls the story psychologically. Her description of the naval officer becomes an image Bill cannot escape. Later audiences have increasingly emphasized this imbalance between screen time and narrative power. Alice demonstrates how a character can dominate a film through another character's imagination, even while physically absent. The film became an important title in Kidman's career as her reputation expanded during the following years. Her performances in Moulin Rouge, The Others, and The Hours confirmed her as a major dramatic actress. Looking backward, Eyes Wide Shut now appears as part of the transition from her earlier identity as a glamorous Hollywood star toward the adventurous and challenging choices that would define much of her later work. Audience reactions to Eyes Wide Shut have always been unusually personal because Stanley Kubrick does not simply ask viewers to follow Bill Harford's journey. He encourages them to question their own ideas about marriage, jealousy, fantasy, fidelity, class, and sexual desire. Different generations have therefore responded to the film in very different ways. Some viewers see a disturbing portrait of marriage, others see a mystery about powerful elites, and others interpret almost everything as part of a dreamlike psychological experience. The film's refusal to confirm one explanation has allowed those reactions to evolve over time. For audiences in 1999, expectations strongly shaped the first experience. Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were among the most famous celebrity couples in the world, and the marketing emphasized their sexuality and real-life marriage. Many viewers expected an erotic thriller built around two glamorous stars. Instead, they encountered a slow, uncomfortable film in which sexual desire repeatedly produces frustration, embarrassment, danger, and fear. The difference left some audiences fascinated and others disappointed. Bill and Alice's argument became one of the scenes that resonated most strongly with adult viewers. Bill believes his marriage is secure partly because he assumes that Alice does not experience desire in the same way he does. Her confession about the naval officer destroys that belief. She never actually has an affair with the man. Yet Bill reacts as though something fundamental has been taken from him. For many viewers, this raises an uncomfortable question. Can an imagined betrayal emotionally matter almost as much as a physical one? The scene also forces audiences to consider how much husbands and wives genuinely know about each other's private thoughts. Marriage creates intimacy, but it does not eliminate individuality. Alice's memories, desires, dreams, and fantasies that exist independently of Bill. The realization is obvious in theory, yet devastating to Bill emotionally. Viewers in long relationships often recognize the discomfort behind that discovery, even if their circumstances are completely different. Some audience members sympathize with Bill. Alice's confession arrives with extraordinary force, and Kubrick repeatedly shows the imagined image that Bill cannot remove from his mind. Anyone who has experienced jealousy can recognize the obsessive nature of such thoughts. Once a painful image has been created, evidence is not required for it to become emotionally powerful. Bill knows the affair never happened, but knowledge does not prevent imagination from hurting him. Other viewers respond far more critically to Bill. They see his journey as evidence of hypocrisy. He comfortably flirts with women at Ziegler's party, but becomes psychologically shattered when he discovers that Alice can desire another man. From this perspective, his nighttime adventures are attempts to restore wounded masculine pride. The irony is that almost every attempt fails or becomes threatening, leaving him less confident than when he began. Alice produces equally varied interpretations. Some audiences view her as the more emotionally honest partner because she acknowledges desires that Bill would prefer not to recognize. Others see her confession as deliberately cruel because she understands how deeply it will affect him. Her dream later intensifies the humiliation. Kubrick never tells viewers exactly how morally to judge her, allowing sympathy to move between husband and wife. The Somerton sequence creates a different kind of audience response. On first viewing, many people experience it primarily through Bill's fear. He enters a mansion without understanding the rules, discovers a mass sexual ritual, receives a warning, and is publicly exposed as an outsider. The sequence activates a basic anxiety, entering a place where everyone else understands what is happening except you. For some viewers, Somerton is primarily about class. Bill is wealthy, educated, and professionally respected, yet he discovers that another level of power exists above him. His money and status can bring him to the door, but cannot make him a member. This interpretation has gained relevance as later generations have become increasingly interested in economic inequality, private networks, and the social structure surrounding extreme wealth. Other audiences focus on conspiracy. Who are the mass participants? What influence do they possess? Was Mandy murdered? What happened to Nick? Who placed the mask beside Alice? Ziegler's explanation answers enough questions to seem plausible, but leaves enough uncertainty to encourage suspicion. The film therefore became particularly attractive to internet communities devoted to decoding hidden details. Online discussion dramatically changed how Eyes Wide Shut was experienced. Earlier audiences watched it in theaters or on home video and discussed it with critics, friends, or film communities. Later viewers could immediately search for interpretations, freeze frames, compare screenshots, identify paintings, analyze costumes, and watch lengthy examinations of individual scenes. The movie became something to investigate as well as watch. This environment produced both thoughtful analysis and unsupported claims. Many viewers found meaningful connections involving mirrors, Christmas lights, passwords, social hierarchy, and repeated dialogue. Other interpretations treated fictional ambiguity as evidence for real-world conspiracies that the film itself cannot prove. The distinction matters, but the popularity of such theories demonstrates how strongly audiences feel that Eyes Wide Shut contains information just beyond their reach. Younger generations also encounter Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman differently. Original audiences knew them as a current celebrity couple whose marriage formed part of the film's publicity. Many modern viewers know that the marriage ended years ago before watching the movie. That historical knowledge changes the emotional experience. Scenes involving distrust and jealousy can appear strangely prophetic, even though it would be unreasonable to treat fictional dialogue as documentation of their private relationship. Cruise's later career creates another generational difference. Eyes Wide Shut is unusual because its character development does not follow the conventional pattern of heroes overcoming external obstacles and emerging stronger. Stanley Kubrick instead built a film around psychological destabilization. Bill Harford begins with confidence in his marriage, profession, social position, and understanding of desire. Alice Harford begins with an awareness that their comfortable marriage contains assumptions that Bill has never seriously questioned. By the ending, neither character has discovered an easy solution. Their development comes from losing certainty and recognizing uncomfortable truths about themselves and each other. Bill experiences the largest visible transformation because the story follows him through most of the film. At the beginning, he appears to have constructed an almost perfect adult identity. He is a successful New York doctor, financially comfortable, socially connected, married to an attractive woman, and father to a young daughter. He moves through expensive environments without hesitation. His profession grants him respect, and he appears accustomed to being trusted. At Victor Ziegler's Christmas party, Bill's confidence is obvious. Two young women flirt with him openly, and he enjoys their attention without appearing especially concerned about what Alice might think. When Ziegler requires medical assistance, Bill immediately becomes competent and authoritative. He treats Mandy after her overdose, gives clear instructions, and controls the emergency. In this environment, being Dr. Harford provides both identity and power. His conversation with Alice the following evening reveals how deeply that confidence extends into his marriage. Bill assumes Alice would never seriously desire another man because she loves him. More importantly, he appears to believe that male and female sexuality operate according to different rules. His certainty is not based on anything Alice has told him. It is based on a story about marriage that he has accepted as fact. Alice destroys that story by describing the naval officer. Her confession becomes Bill's first major psychological turning point. The important detail is that nothing happened. Bill is not responding to adultery, but to the discovery that Alice possesses desires he cannot control. The stranger becomes powerful precisely because Bill knows almost nothing about him. His imagination supplies the missing details. From that point forward, Bill's behavior can be understood as an attempt to recover damaged confidence. He begins seeing imagined images of Alice with the officer and becomes increasingly receptive to sexual opportunities. Marion declares her love beside her dead father's body. Domino invites him into her apartment. Each encounter offers a possibility of proving that Bill is also desired. Yet Bill repeatedly fails to convert possibility into action. He does not accept Marion's declaration. His encounter with Domino is interrupted by Alice's telephone call. His journey eventually leads to Somerton, where apparent sexual freedom becomes something much darker. Instead of restoring control, each experience demonstrates that Bill understands less than he thought. Bill's repeated use of his medical identity is significant to his development. When uncertain, he often tells people that he is a doctor or displays professional credentials. Earlier, this identity seemed naturally authoritative. As his journey becomes stranger, it begins to feel like a defensive mechanism. Bill is attempting to use a social role he understands to control situations that do not respect his authority. Somerton produces the most dramatic collapse of that strategy. Bill obtains the clothing, learns the password, pays for transportation, and successfully enters the mansion. He has assembled the external appearance of belonging, but he cannot reproduce the invisible knowledge possessed by genuine members. Once exposed, Dr. Harford is irrelevant. He is simply an intruder surrounded by people with greater power. The masked woman who intervenes on his behalf reverses Bill's earlier relationship with Mandy. At Ziegler's party, Bill was the competent doctor saving a vulnerable woman. At Somerton, Bill becomes vulnerable while a woman offers herself to protect him. Whether the sacrifice is literal, theatrical, or something between the two, the reversal is psychologically important. Bill is no longer the rescuer. His investigation the next day represents an attempt to recover rational control. He retraces his steps, questions hotel staff, returns to the costume shop, visits Somerton, and searches for information about Mandy. This resembles the behavior of a detective, but Bill never becomes a successful investigator. Every answer creates another uncertainty. Nick has disappeared. The mask is missing. Somerton knows he returned. Mandy is dead. Ziegler knows more than Bill does. The billiard room conversation with Ziegler completes the destruction of Bill's social confidence. Ziegler explains that he was at Somerton and recognized him. Bill discovers that even during a supposedly secret adventure, he remained visible to someone from his ordinary social life. Ziegler's calm manner reinforces the difference between them. Bill entered the world accidentally. Ziegler apparently belongs close enough to it to understand its rules. Bill's final transformation occurs when he sees the mask beside the sleeping Alice. Throughout the story, he has tried to keep his jealousy, attempted infidelities, and Somerton experience separated from his marriage. The mask makes that separation impossible. His emotional breakdown represents the collapse of the controlled identity he has maintained since the beginning. For perhaps the first time, Bill stops attempting to manage the situation. Alice's arc is less physically expansive but equally important. She begins as Bill's partner within the same privileged domestic environment, yet the early scenes already suggest that she experiences that life differently. At Ziegler's party, she becomes intoxicated and allows Sandor Savas to flirt with her. His attention gives her an opportunity to consider the boundaries of her marriage without crossing them. The costume and set design of Eyes Wide Shut are essential to the film's atmosphere because Stanley Kubrick uses clothing, architecture, furniture, masks, and decoration to separate different levels of society while connecting them to repeated visual ideas. The environments initially appear realistic, but as Bill Harford travels deeper into the night, they become increasingly theatrical. Production design and costume therefore perform a psychological function. They show Bill moving from familiar domestic life into spaces where appearance, money, sexuality, and identity operate according to rules he does not fully understand. The Harford's apartment establishes the film's domestic world. It is comfortable and expensive without resembling an enormous mansion. Books, paintings, furniture, lamps, toys, personal objects, and family possessions make the space feel genuinely inhabited. This distinction is important because Bill and Alice are clearly privileged, but they are not members of the almost unreachable level of wealth later represented by Somerton. The apartment was reportedly influenced by Kubrick's memories of his own New York living environment. Its design creates intimacy through narrow corridors, connected rooms, warm lamps, and domestic clutter. Bill and Alice are often surrounded by objects associated with family life. Their daughter Helena's belongings remind the audience that the marriage exists within a larger household rather than functioning merely as an erotic relationship between two adults. Christmas decorations transform this realistic home into something more stylized. A Christmas tree and colored lights appear within the apartment, beginning a motif that continues almost everywhere Bill travels. The decorations create continuity between otherwise separate environments. Ziegler's mansion, streets, shops, restaurants, and domestic spaces all seem connected by the same seasonal glow. The Christmas design also creates deliberate contradiction. Trees, lights, gifts, and decorations normally communicate warmth and family celebration. Eyes Wide Shut places them beside marital conflict, prostitution, drug use, death, jealousy, and sexual secrecy. The cheerful decorations remain indifferent to what the characters are experiencing. Their beauty makes uncomfortable scenes stranger rather than safer. Victor Ziegler's mansion establishes a higher social level. The Christmas party takes place within grand rooms filled with elegant guests, formal clothing, expensive furnishings, and carefully arranged decorations. Everything communicates wealth without requiring dialogue to explain Ziegler's position. Bill and Alice belong comfortably enough to attend, but the scale of the environment makes clear that they are visitors within someone else's world. The bathroom where Bill treats Mandy provides an important contrast to the public party. Downstairs, Ziegler is a polished host surrounded by respectable guests. Upstairs, Bill discovers a private sexual and medical crisis. The luxurious setting remains consistent, but its meaning changes. Production design, therefore, helps establish one of the film's central ideas. Respectable surfaces and hidden behavior can occupy different rooms of the same building. Ziegler's billiard room later becomes one of the most important sets. The room is dominated by deep red tones, polished surfaces, artwork, and the billiard table itself. Unlike the crowded Christmas party, this space feels private and controlled. Bill and Ziegler move around the table while discussing Somerton, Mandy, and Nick. The design gives Ziegler visual authority because Bill has again entered a space that belongs to him. Bill's clothing initially reinforces his professional identity. He wears expensive but relatively conventional suits, shirts, overcoats, and formal evening clothes. His wardrobe communicates success without making him visually flamboyant. He dresses like a man who expects to move comfortably through hospitals, wealthy homes, restaurants, and social gatherings. Clothing functions as part of his confidence. Alice's wardrobe communicates a different kind of social identity. At Ziegler's party, her elegant black dress emphasizes sophistication and sensuality, while remaining appropriate to the elite environment. Throughout the film, her clothing moves between formal glamour and domestic intimacy. This contrast supports the difference between the Alice presented to society and the Alice who confronts Bill privately about desire and fantasy. Nicole Kidman's physical appearance is also carefully integrated into the design. Her red hair becomes a powerful visual feature against the film's blue and golden lighting. In several scenes, costume, hair, and lighting combine to make Alice appear simultaneously familiar and almost unreal. She belongs to Bill's domestic world, but increasingly becomes an object of his imagination. The costume shop represents a major turning point because clothing becomes a literal method of gaining access. Bill cannot simply arrive at Somerton as Dr. Harford. He requires a tuxedo, cloak, hood, and mask. His ordinary social identity must be replaced with a costume. The sequence makes explicit something the film has been suggesting throughout. Social worlds have dress codes, and clothing can temporarily imitate belonging. Milich's rainbow costume shop is itself an important set. It is filled with mannequins, garments, theatrical objects, masks, and costumes, creating a space where identity can be purchased and changed. The environment is visually crowded compared with Kubrick's more controlled, wealthy interiors. Bill moves through objects designed specifically for pretending to be someone else. The discovery of Milich's daughter with two older men adds a disturbing dimension to this theatrical environment. Costumes and performance surround a scene in which Bill cannot easily determine the nature of the relationships he is witnessing. When he returns later and finds Milich behaving differently toward the men, the shop becomes associated not only with disguise, but also with the possibility that moral outrage itself can become negotiable. The screenplay of Eyes Wide Shut is unusual because much of its tension comes not from dramatic action, but from conversations in which characters hesitate, repeat themselves, avoid direct answers, or reveal more than another person wants to hear. Stanley Kubrick wrote the screenplay with Frederick Raphael, adapting Arthur Schnitzler's dream story into contemporary New York. The basic narrative of marital jealousy and a mysterious masked gathering remains connected to Schnitzler's work. But Kubrick and Raphael created dialogue suited to Bill and Alice Harford's modern marriage, professional status, and social environment. The script immediately establishes an important contrast between ordinary conversation and hidden meaning. Bill and Alice initially speak like a comfortable married couple preparing for a social event. Their exchanges are practical and familiar. They discuss their appearance, their daughter, and the evening ahead. Nothing sounds like the beginning of a psychological crisis. This normality is important because the screenplay gradually reveals how much uncertainty exists beneath apparently routine communication. At Victor Ziegler's Christmas party, dialogue becomes a form of seduction. Alice's conversation with Sandor Savist is sophisticated, playful, and increasingly direct. Sandor does not immediately state his intentions in crude terms. He uses charm, philosophical observations, questions about marriage, and compliments to test Alice's boundaries. The conversation demonstrates how social language can disguise sexual negotiation. Bill's interaction with the two young women at the party works similarly, but with a lighter tone. They tease him, flatter him, and attempt to lead him away. Bill participates comfortably, suggesting that flirtation itself does not initially threaten his understanding of fidelity. The screenplay quietly establishes his double standard before Alice ever challenges it. The tone changes when Bill is summoned upstairs to help Ziegler. The dialogue becomes professional and urgent. Bill asks questions, gives Mandy instructions, and warns her about the danger of what she has taken. His language is controlled because he understands the situation. This establishes a version of Bill that will gradually disappear. When dealing with medicine, he possesses authority. When dealing with desire and secrecy, his words become increasingly uncertain. The most important piece of writing in the film is the marijuana conversation between Bill and Alice. Structurally, the scene functions as the engine for everything that follows. It begins casually, moves through teasing and jealousy, becomes an argument about male and female sexuality, and finally reaches Alice's confession about the naval officer. The escalation feels dangerous because neither character initially seems to realize where the conversation is going. Repetition is essential to the scene. Bill frequently repeats parts of what Alice says, as if he needs additional time to process them. This becomes a broader characteristic of his dialogue throughout the movie. He often responds to surprising information by restating it as a question. The technique slows conversations down and emphasizes how Bill struggles when events move beyond his expectations. Alice's dialogue is much more aggressive during the argument. She challenges Bill's assumptions about why women remain faithful and refuses to accept his comfortable explanation of their marriage. Her laughter becomes almost another form of dialogue. Before she provides her story, she communicates through tone and reaction that Bill's certainty appears absurd to her. The naval officer monologue is powerful because the screenplay does not require an actual affair. Alice describes seeing a stranger and experiencing an overwhelming possibility. Her words create an event inside Bill's imagination. From that point onward, the screenplay can repeatedly return to the emotional consequences of something that never physically occurred. This is one of the script's most sophisticated ideas. Words become actions. Alice speaks, Bill imagines, and the imagined scene changes his behavior. The screenplay therefore refuses to treat fantasy as irrelevant simply because it remains internal. A few sentences spoken inside a bedroom send Bill across New York. The dialogue with Marion Nathanson introduces another recurring pattern. Unexpected confession. Bill arrives expecting to perform professional duty after the death of Marion's father. Instead, Marion suddenly declares that she loves him. Bill again responds with uncertainty and repetition. The scene is uncomfortable partly because the dialogue seems to violate the expected rules of the situation. Marion's fiancé arrives shortly afterward, making confession even stranger. Kubrick and Raphael repeatedly place Bill in conversations where conventional social roles remain on the surface, while private desire disrupts them underneath. Doctor and patient's daughter, husband and wife, customer and sex worker, pianist and old acquaintance, wealthy host and physician. Each relationship contains information that complicates its official definition. Bill's conversation with Domino contains more humor and warmth. Their negotiation begins as a commercial encounter, but the dialogue becomes surprisingly casual. Bill appears almost shy despite having followed her into the apartment. Domino's relaxed manner temporarily reduces the tension. Yet, even here, Bill cannot simply state what he wants. He asks questions, delays, and allows the situation to unfold around him. Alice's telephone call interrupts the encounter with very ordinary language. This is typical of the screenplay's irony. Bill may be imagining himself on the edge of adultery, but the domestic world can suddenly reappear through a telephone conversation. The contrast between what Alice knows and what the audience knows creates tension without requiring Alice to say anything suspicious. The marketing of Eyes Wide Shut faced an unusual challenge. Warner Brothers had to sell the final film of Stanley Kubrick while protecting the secrecy surrounding a project that had been hidden from the public for years. At the same time, the studio possessed an extraordinary commercial advantage. Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, one of the most famous married couples in the world, were playing a married couple in a story involving sex, jealousy, temptation, and fidelity. The promotional campaign therefore transformed mystery itself into one of the movie's greatest selling points. Long before the film reached theaters in July 1999, its production had already generated enormous curiosity. Kubrick had not released a feature since Full Metal Jacket in 1987, creating a 12-year gap between films. His reputation for secrecy meant that reliable information about Eyes Wide Shut remained limited during much of its unusually lengthy production. Reports about Cruise and Kidman's extended commitment to the shoot encouraged speculation about exactly what Kubrick was making. The combination of secrecy and celebrity produced extensive media coverage without Warner Brothers needing to explain the story in detail. Entertainment journalists discussed the long filming schedule, Kubrick's demanding methods, and rumors about the movie's sexual content. Cruise and Kidman's participation gave publications an obvious angle. Audiences were encouraged to wonder how much of the fictional marriage might resemble the actors' real relationship, even though such assumptions were speculative. Kubrick's death in March 1999 dramatically changed the context of the campaign. He had recently shown the film to Cruise, Kidman, and Warner Brothers executives, and his sudden death meant that Eyes Wide Shut would arrive as his final movie. Marketing could no longer present it simply as the long-awaited return of Stanley Kubrick. It had become the last completed film audiences would ever receive from one of cinema's most famous directors. This gave the release a sense of historical importance. Kubrick's name already carried enormous cultural weight because of films such as 2001, A Space Odyssey, A Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon, The Shining, and Full Metal Jacket. Advertising could therefore sell Eyes Wide Shut not only through Cruise and Kidman, but through Kubrick himself. For serious film audiences, the phrase Stanley Kubrick's final film was an exceptionally powerful attraction. The promotional imagery focused strongly on intimacy, between Cruise and Kidman. One of the best-known images showed the couple embracing in front of a mirror, immediately communicating sexuality and marriage without revealing the larger plot. This was an effective choice because it allowed the campaign to suggest explicit material while preserving the mystery surrounding Somerton and Bill's nighttime journey. The mirror was particularly appropriate as a promotional image. It gave audiences the stars they recognized while introducing themes of reflection, observation, double identity, and performance. Even viewers unfamiliar with the story could understand the basic premise. This would be an intimate and provocative examination of a famous screen couple. Trailers similarly emphasized erotic tension. Images of Cruise and Kidman together were combined with glimpses of nudity, masks, parties, and mysterious environments. The campaign avoided explaining too much about the narrative. Instead of outlining Bill's investigation step by step, it sold atmosphere. Audiences were invited to ask what these characters were doing and what kind of secret world Kubrick had created. Chris Isaac's Baby Did a Bad Thing became particularly important to the promotional identity of the movie. The song's sensual rhythm and provocative title complemented images of Cruise and Kidman and helped present Eyes Wide Shut as a dangerous erotic event. For many viewers, the music became closely associated with the film, even though the movie itself ultimately depended on a much wider and stranger musical landscape. This marketing strategy was commercially understandable, but also contributed to one of the biggest problems surrounding the initial reception. Advertising encouraged audiences to expect an erotic thriller centered on the sexual chemistry of Cruise and Kidman. Kubrick's film is considerably less straightforward. It contains nudity and sexual situations, but its dominant emotions are jealousy, frustration, anxiety, alienation, and fear. Sex in the movie is frequently interrupted or distanced. Bill approaches Domino but does not complete the encounter. Alice's most important act of apparent betrayal exists only as fantasy. Somerton contains extensive sexual imagery, yet masks, ritualized behavior, and threatening music make the environment emotionally cold. Viewers attracted by advertising promising sensual excitement sometimes encountered something far more uncomfortable. The difference between the promotional promise and the finished experience became part of the film's cultural history. Some early disappointment can be understood as a marketing problem rather than simply a critical rejection. Audiences have been sold the idea of Cruise and Kidman, revealing their intimate chemistry under Kubrick's direction. What they received was partly an examination of how fantasies about other people's intimacy can be misleading. The film's rating became another major promotional issue. Warner Brothers wanted an R rating for the American theatrical release because an NC-17 classification would significantly restrict commercial distribution. Portions of the Somerton sequence contained explicit sexual activity that created difficulties with the ratings process. Eyes Wide Shut becomes even more revealing when compared with Arthur Schnitzler's Dream Story and with Stanley Kubrick's earlier films. Although it appears on the surface to be an erotic psychological drama about a married New York doctor, it belongs naturally within Kubrick's career. Like 2001, A Space Odyssey, A Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon, The Shining, and Full Metal Jacket, it follows characters moving through systems they believe they understand before discovering forces larger than themselves. What makes Eyes Wide Shut distinctive is that the system under examination is partly marriage itself. The most important comparison is with Dream Story, the 1926 novella that provided the narrative foundation. Schnitzler's story is set in Vienna during the early 20th century and follows Dr. Fridolin and his wife Albertine. Their conversation about past temptations destabilizes Fridolin, sending him through a nocturnal series of encounters that eventually leads to a secret masked gathering. Kubrick and screenwriter Frederick Raphael preserved this essential structure while transforming the setting, period, social context, and details. Bill Harford is therefore the modern counterpart of Fridolin, while Alice corresponds to Albertine. Both stories begin with a married couple confronting the uncomfortable reality that love does not eliminate attraction to other people. The husband's journey becomes a response to wounded pride and jealousy. In both versions, fantasy and reality increasingly overlap until the nighttime adventure feels psychologically closer to a dream than an ordinary sequence of events. Moving the story from Vienna to New York changes its cultural meaning. Schnitzler wrote within the world of Viennese modernism, where psychoanalysis Sexuality, repression, dreams, and bourgeois respectability were major intellectual concerns. Kubrick translates those anxieties into wealthy late 20th century Manhattan. Bill's professional status, expensive apartment, taxis, credit cards, hotels, costume shops, and elite parties create a modern version of the social hierarchy present in Schnitzler. The Christmas setting is another major Kubrick transformation. The film is saturated with Christmas trees, colored lights, gifts, decorations, and seasonal displays. These images create visual unity while adding irony. A holiday associated with family warmth surrounds a story about jealousy, prostitution, drugs, secrecy, and marital instability. Schnitzler's narrative is dreamlike through language and structure. Kubrick makes the dream visible through color and design. Kubrick also intensifies the social power surrounding the mass gathering. Summerton feels not merely like a forbidden sexual event, but like access to a hidden level of privilege. Bill is wealthy by normal standards, yet the mansion makes him seem insignificant. The ceremony therefore becomes a class revelation. Bill discovers that professional success does not place him near the top of the social hierarchy. This connects Eyes Wide Shut with Barry Lyndon. Both films are deeply interested in class, access, ritual, and the ways people use appearance to move through social structures. Barry attempts to climb 18th century European society through charm, marriage, clothing, gambling, and opportunity. Bill similarly uses money, professional status, formal clothing, and a password to move into spaces that would otherwise remain closed. Yet the two protagonists fail in different ways. Barry spends years constructing a social identity that ultimately collapses. Bill's attempted transformation lasts only one night. His rented cloak and mask allow him to imitate membership at Summerton, but the deception is quickly exposed. In both films, costume can create the appearance of belonging without guaranteeing genuine power. Eyes Wide Shut can also be compared with The Shining. The genres are different, but both films transform architecture into psychological space. The Overlook Hotel becomes increasingly impossible to separate from Jack Torrance's mental deterioration. In Eyes Wide Shut, New York and Summerton perform a similar function for Bill. Streets, corridors, bedrooms, staircases, and locked entrances seem to reflect his growing disorientation. Both films also use repetition to create dream logic. The Shining repeats corridors, patterns, rooms, and visual compositions until a hotel feels like a maze. Eyes Wide Shut repeats Christmas lights, sexual invitations, mirrors, doors, passwords, and conversations. Bill's journey becomes another kind of maze, except the walls are social and psychological rather than architectural. The comparison extends ambiguity. The Shining refuses to explain completely what is supernatural, psychological, or historically embedded within the Overlook. Eyes Wide Shut similarly refuses to establish exactly how much danger exists behind Summerton. Ziegler provides an explanation, but the viewer cannot know whether it is complete. Kubrick uses uncertainty not as a missing answer, but as part of the experience. A comparison with Clockwork Orange reveals another recurring Kubrick concern, the relationship between sexuality and power. Alex experiences sex, violence, and control as interconnected forms of domination. Eyes Wide Shut is far quieter, but sexuality is again inseparable from hierarchy. At Summerton, bodies are available while identities remain hidden, and the structure of the ceremony suggests that some participants possess far more power than others. The difference is crucial. A Clockwork Orange is aggressive, youthful, satirical, and deliberately confrontational. Eyes Wide Shut is slow, adult, melancholic, and restrained. Alex attacks the world, while Bill wanders through it. Alex often believes in his own power because he can impose himself physically. Bill discovers that even money and professional respect provide little protection when he enters the wrong social environment. Full Metal Jacket offers another useful contrast. That film examines institutions that reshape identity through military training and war. Recruits receive uniforms, named commands, and expected behaviors. Eyes Wide Shut focuses on less visible systems: marriage, class, sexuality, and social etiquette. Bill is not ordered to behave in a particular way, yet his actions are constantly shaped by assumptions about what a husband, doctor, wealthy man, or desirable male should be.